Welcome back, I'm George, and in this video I'm going to show you the first things you need to do with your new iPad Air M3. I have customization settings, I have improvements for your user experience, and of course I have lots of interesting features that are disabled by default and that make your iPad feel and be 10 times better. So that being said, and without further ado, let's begin with the first thing you need to do as soon as you set up this new iPad Air, which is to come to the settings, then tap on General, and then tap on Software Update. Now, normally I would not tell you to update to the latest version of iPadOS, but this year things have been a little buggy with iPadOS 18, and well, Apple has been slowly working on fixing and improving the user experience. So generally, the latest version of iPadOS 18, the better it is going to work and feel. But anyways, let's assume you have already done that and move on to some more interesting things. If you swipe down from the top right of your iPad Air, you'll see that you have, as always, your control center, where you can change your connection settings, your media settings, volume, brightness, and all the basic things you've been able to do, I think, since iOS 7. Now, that being said, for the first time ever, both on the iPhone and on the iPad, you now have the option to customize the control center to display exactly what you want and in the order you want. So if you tap and hold anywhere on the display, you'll see that there is a new editing menu where you can essentially, as I said, grab things and place them anywhere you want. You can delete anything too. You can delete the controls for media. You can delete the controls for connection. And if you tap right here at the bottom on Add a Control, you'll see that there is a very, very long list of quick toggles that you can select and place also anywhere you want. So let's tap on Silent Mode. As you can see, it shows up by default right by the side of the last one, but you can place it anywhere you want. You can place it at the bottom right here. And something very cool that only a few people know is that if you swipe up like this, you'll get access to another page filled with empty icons, so you can place even more quick toggles. And well, you can do this as many times as you want. So you have another page right here that if you start filling up with some quick toggle, automatically there will be a fourth page for your icons that you can start filling up. Let's add this, and then there will be a fifth page and sixth, and well, you can do this, as I said, as many times as you want. I'm not really sure what kind of person would want to have 6 tabs of quick toggles. That kind of defeats the purpose, but you have the option. But anyways, that being said, and before I continue, I would like to take a break to talk about 2 of my favorite accessories for the iPad Air. First, we have the ESR Flip Magnetic Case, which has a multi-angle design for all of your viewing and creative needs, which, by the way, is very strong. As I said, it is a magnetic case, so it is going to feel very robust and premium. And well, even better, it also gives you a vertical stand, which is very special. I feel like many cases don't have this, so you can use it in even more ways and situations. And second, we have the ESR Ultra Fit Screen Protector, which provides a very simple 2-step installation method, so you can get it done fast, and even better, so you have a dust-free, bubble-free experience. If you just got the iPad Air, I believe these 2 accessories will give you more functionality and more safety at a very reasonable price. Of course, you have a link for both accessories down below in the description. Thanks ESR for sponsoring this video. Now, that being said, and moving on with more customization, if you swipe down like this to access the notification panel, and then you tap and hold anywhere you want on the display, you'll access your collections, which is a place where you can access all of your individual Lockscreen, Homescreen styles or designs, and of course where you can add more. So if you swipe all the way to the right, you'll see a new page to add a wallpaper for your home screen, for your lock screen with its individual design and functionality even. As you can see, we have the typical featured ones from iOS 18, classic ones from Apple. We have weather and astronomy, kaleidoscope, emoji, Unity, well, the typical Apple default wallpapers, but you can also select from your photos if you want. In this case, let's go with the basic iPad OS 18 wallpaper. Then as you can see, you have a page to customize your lock screen, so you can select what information shows up at the top. With essentially only 3 apps to choose, you can show information from the calendar, from the clock, or from your reminders. Then a little bit below, we have the time, which is very customizable. You can choose a different font, you can choose a different size or girth for the text. I don't think that's the right word. Let's call it the font density. I think that's more accurate. And of course, you can also choose a different color, although I generally recommend you stick with the default one because it's going to be the most contrasty against the background and therefore the easiest one to read. And well, of course, here at the bottom, you also have the option to add widgets, which in this case can be from first-party apps from Apple, like Battery, Calendar, and Clock, or third-party apps like ChatGPT, Gmail, and many more. So the more apps you have installed on the iPad, the more apps you'll have the option to add as widgets. In this case, as you can see, we have 2 main formats. We have the squared little ones right here, which you can add 4 of, and we have the slightly bigger, more rectangular ones, which we can only add 2 of. And well, we can of course also do a combination. So you can add a long rectangular one, and you can add 2 small squared widgets. Now, once you have customized your ideal wallpaper, you just have to tap right here at the top right on Add, and then you can also, well, tap on Customize Home Screen if you want to make a slight change to the home screen wallpaper. In this case, you can blur it and you can, well, add a simple color or a gradient, although be wary that for some reason you cannot add a secondary featured wallpaper from Apple. So if you've selected this one for the lock screen, this is the only featured Apple wallpaper you can use for the home screen for some reason, but you will also have the option to add any of your photos. And well, once you're done, you just have to tap on Done right here, and you will have a functional lock screen plus home screen design or collection, which, by the way, something very few people know, you can attach to a specific focus mode. So if you currently use focus modes on your iPad or iPhone, you will probably find this very useful because instead of changing focus modes, you can change the entire layout of the iPad, including icon positions or the amount of icons on the home screen. So for example, if you're trying to reduce your screen time, you can set a focus mode attached to a collection with very few icons available, so you use less of your apps and you use less of your device in general. Now, that being said, and getting back to the customization settings on the iPad, let's come back right here to the settings page, then tap on Apple Intelligence and Siri, and then tap on Talk to Siri. Now, right here at the top, you'll see Hey Deary. I'm not going to say the magical phrase. As you can see in my iPad, it doesn't say that because it is partially in Spanish, but in your iPad, it will say the magical phrase. And well, even though it is very convenient to summon your assistant by saying 2 words, I suggest you turn off this feature because it burns a lot of battery life. You have to understand that for this feature to work, the iPad has to use all of its microphones all the time so it can rapidly detect when someone says those 2 words. So it is actively looking for voices all the time, even though 99% of that time you won't be using this assistant, especially considering it is not the best in the market. Now, more in that vein, and also to save battery life, let's scroll down right here to the notifications page. And here on notification style, I suggest you go app by app, making sure that you actually want for those apps to send you notifications. Of course, number 1, because it is going to be more convenient to only receive notifications from the apps you want, but also because you are going to save a lot of battery life. So I'm not really sure if you were aware of this, but for an app to be able to send you those notifications, it has to be actually updating in the background all the time and therefore burning more and more battery life. So the least apps that have the power to send you notifications, the more battery life you'll have left. And well, also in that vein, to save more battery life, if you tap on privacy and security, and then you tap on location services, you'll see a list of every single app that has access to your location. Now, much like with notifications, having access to your location in real time is something that is going to burn a lot of battery life. So the least apps that have access to that information, the more battery life you'll save. Ideally, you want to enable the apps that need your location, like for example, Google Maps or the weather, and also disable all the apps that don't need to access your location, like the App Store or maybe Instagram. Of course, like always, you will have the option to do this when you install the app, but many times because you're in a rush or you don't really see the pop-up message, you enable the location services on useless apps, and they stay there in the background burning more and more battery life. But anyways, that being said, let's come back here to the home screen to talk about one of the biggest changes with iOS 18. For many, many years, the only way you could customize your home screen on the iPad was to change the wallpaper. That was essentially the only thing you could do to make it look different. But this year with iPadOS 18, we get a lot of new customization options. So first up, for the first time ever on an iOS/iPadOS device, you can tap and hold on an icon and move it anywhere you want on the home screen. So apps don't have to magnetically attach to each other like it's been the case for a very long time. Now you can essentially place apps anywhere you want on the home screen. Now, next up, if you tap right here on Edit and then you tap on Customize, you'll also be able to change the way your apps look. So you have the light mode, which is the default one we've had for the last 20 years. You then have the dark mode, which is going to make everything look a little darker. And then you have the tinted mode, which is essentially going to let you change the colors of your apps to any color you want. As you can see, the bottom row determines the intensity, so you can have very intense reds or blues or yellows. And then the top bar determines, of course, the color. So you can choose a light yellow or a light green. Maybe you can change to a very strong red. You can essentially do anything you want. Now, to be fair, I am yet to see a tinted set of iOS icons that looks good, or at least a little bit better than the default ones we've had for the last 20 years. But I believe, to be fair, that the dark mode can look very, very appealing, of course, depending on what wallpaper you've selected. But that being said, my favorite customization option for the icons is that you can now make them a little bit bigger and delete the text from below. So you get a much cleaner, much more professional looking display or home screen. That, combined with the dark mode and a smart placement for widgets and apps, can lead to some very interesting home screen options or designs. And well, even though those were probably the most surprising changes, there's actually more customization you can do on your home screen. So if you tap and hold on any app, now you'll see an option to require Touch ID, which is essentially going to lock that app, so you can only enter the app and access the information with a valid Touch ID finger. So if we tap right here and include our Touch ID fingerprint, we will essentially be required to unlock the app every time we want to enter. Now, of course, this may not be the most useful thing for a video game, but I'm pretty sure that for your photos or for the Files app, this can actually be very interesting, especially if you're handing your iPad to your kids or to other people, and you don't really want for certain things to be seen by everyone. Now, that being said, and moving on, I want to make a little stop from talking about customization to tell you about my two favorite features on the iPad. The first one is called drag and drop, and it essentially lets you, like the name suggests, drag items from one app like this, and then drop them in a different app like that. As you can see, in a couple seconds, automatically those items get copied into the other app. And well, you can do this vice versa like this. You can drag the items from the second app and then drag them again to the first app, like that. In this case, they don't really copy because they are the same photo, but you can essentially do this with many apps. Not every app, but many apps. And second, but definitely not less impressive, if you tap right here on Safari, you will now be able to hide distracting elements like cookie banners and ads and stuff like that with only 3 taps and in any website you want. So if you tap right here on the search bar and then you tap on hide distracting items, you'll be able to tap and hide, as I said, anything you want from any website or article, so you can have a much better reading experience. In this case, as you can see, there's nothing too distracting, so let's tap on done and resume our reading experience. But I'm pretty sure that in many websites you currently access, there's many more pop-ups and cookie banners and distracting ads happening and showing up all the time. And well, with this feature, you will be able to get rid of them in a very easy way. But anyways, that being said, let's talk about one of the most important functionalities on the iPad, which is the multitasking options. All the options you have to use multiple apps at the same time. Now, the first one and the easiest one to access is the split screen mode. So you can just tap on an app, swipe down like this, and essentially select a different app to create a split screen mode in a very easy way. Now, as you can see, you can change the aspect ratio of each app. So you can, well, in this case, I don't think you can do the middle. You can only do like one covering 2/3 and the other covering the other third. But I'm pretty sure that if we use this on landscape mode, there it is. There's also the option to do 50-50. Now, unfortunately, there is no option to display more than 2 apps at the same time, but there is a little trick you can use to be able to access 3 apps simultaneously on the iPad, which is to swipe up to access the dock, then grab a third app, and then place it right here in the middle. And automatically, just like that, there will be a pop-up app created, so you can theoretically use the app on the left, the app on the right, and the app in the pop-up all at the same time. Now, as you can see, you can also drag this pop-up to the left or the right, so it's more convenient. Now, of course, you could also use one main app taking up the entire iPad screen and then a pop-up app like this. But unfortunately, there's no option to display multiple pop-ups on the iPad. So you can't really do one main app and 2 or 3 pop-ups on top of it. But anyways, that being said and moving on, let's actually talk about one of the most confusing aspects on the iPad, which are the multi-finger gestures. There is a lot of gestures you can use on the iPad, and well, as I said, things can get a little confusing. So, as many of you know, you can just tap on an icon to enter an app, and then swipe from the bottom to leave the app. But you can also tap on the icon to open, and then pinch with your 5 fingers like this to close the app like this, or to access the multitasking like this. There's only like a split-second difference between taking you home and then taking you to the multitasking menu, so it can get a little confusing. But to be fair, when you're playing a video game and you can't really swipe once to leave the app, you have to kind of swipe twice and it's a little inconvenient, you can always pinch like this to, well, let me do it again, pinch like this to quickly leave that app. But anyways, that being said, and before we continue, I actually have to go back to talk about the multitasking options because I left the most important and also controversial multitasking mode for the iPad. If we swipe down from the top right to access the control center, and then we tap this little icon right here, we will automatically access the Stage Manager mode, which, as you can see at first glance, doesn't look that different from the normal iPad mode. But when you enter an app, you immediately notice that things look a little different. As you can see, this essentially tries to emote or imitate the traditional window app mode we have on desktop computers or Mac OS, where you essentially have a main app right here in the middle, and then you have your most used apps on the left. So you can quickly jump between different apps like this and access those apps either in full screen mode, as you can see, or when you swipe from the bottom right corner, you can access those apps in a windowed resizable mode. So, well, in this case, I don't think you can make the app any smaller, but for many of these apps, you have a lot of customization for the size of the app. So you can make it very tiny and include two apps. Well, I'm not really sure how you can do this. Let's try to add two apps. There it is at the same time and resize those two apps so you can fit both comfortably. Or I believe you can also add a third app right there. So theoretically, you could have three apps running at the same time. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this mode, mainly because it is very confusing and it kind of takes up a lot of unused space with the dock being here at all times and there having to be gaps of wallpaper. Most iPad users have concluded that this is kind of a gimmick and it's not really more useful. But to be fair, if you're planning on connecting your iPad to a monitor, this can actually be a game changer because if you have a much bigger display with a lot more size to, add icons and apps, this can actually give you a desktop-like experience. So TLDR, if you're planning to use the iPad as is, maybe Stage Manager is not going to be the best idea, but if you connect it to an external display, especially if it's big, it can actually be very useful. But anyways, I'm sorry for that little break. Now let's keep talking about multi-finger gestures on the iPad. If you want to access the app manager on the iPad, you can always, of course, swipe and hold like you can do on the iPhone. You can swipe up with 4 fingers like this. Or, as I said earlier, you can tap on an app and then pinch with 5 fingers and hold, which, as I said earlier, is kind of confusing. I don't recommend that gesture. But yeah, those are the 3 ways to access the multitasking, multi-app menu on the iPad. Now, something very few people know is that there's actually quick gestures when we swipe from the bottom corners of the iPad. So if you swipe from the left corner, as you can see, you can quickly take a screen capture. And when you swipe from the right side, you can access a little note pop-up so you can, scribble something with the Apple Pencil or write something real quick. Ideal for those times when you have to capture a piece of information really fast. Now, moving on, something that is also very interesting is that if you swipe down to access the spotlight and then you pinch on the keyboard, you can actually shrink it, making it almost the size of a normal iPhone keyboard. So you can, well, I'm not really sure what this is for. Maybe it's for when you're using the Apple Pencil, but you can essentially access the same keyboard size you have on the iPhone on the iPad. And of course, if you pinch out like this, you can remain using the iPad keyboard like you should use it. Oh, and by the way, now that we are covering the keyboard, a very old trick that very few people know, surprisingly, is that if you type anything on the iPad, I'm not really making any sense. If you type anything on the iPad and you want to correct a typo or anything, you can tap and hold on the spacebar, and then automatically the keyboard will turn into a trackpad, so you can swipe like this to then access the exact specific letter you want to change and change it in a very easy and fast way without having to tap and accidentally do things you didn't want to do. This is a very clean, simple, and fast way to change a misspell or a typo. But anyways, that being said, I think that pretty much covers all the things you need to do on your iPad as soon as you set it up. And well, by the way, look at this. Let's get back to what I said at the beginning of the video. iOS and iPadOS 18 have been a little buggy. In this case, as you can see, it's displaying the time and date in vertical mode, but I'm using the iPad on landscape mode. These kinds of things happen all the time. So once again, if you can, as soon as possible, tap on General, Software Update, and update the iPad to the latest version so these little issues don't happen on your iPad. But anyways, if you have any questions regarding anything that I said in this video, please tell me in the comments. And if not, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again very soon. Peace.